We're living in the safest, most comfortable era in human history. Our children have more protection, more privilege, more opportunity than any generation before them. And yet, ADHD rates keep rising, anxiety keeps rising, depression as well. Because too often we think being around our children is the same as being there for them. However, our full, honest presence gives them the strength to succeed in life and to feel at home inside of themselves. So, when the time came for us to bring this conversation to life, there was only one person we had in mind. She's a psychoanalyst with 40 years of experience who has built a life's work on saying not what flatters parents, but what frees their children. Please welcome the incredible Erica Komisar. Welcome, Erica, to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's such an honor to see you here. Could you take a minute first, to introduce yourself to our audience? Tell us about who you are, what you do.
So, I'm a social worker, a psychoanalyst, a parent guidance coach, and an author. And I write books about the importance of presence, both in the early years, what we call the first critical period of brain development, and also in adolescence or the second critical period of brain development. Basically, your presence, as much as possible, we say more is more, the more you can be there physically and emotionally throughout your child's childhood. And when you still have them at home, the greater the chance that your child will be mentally healthy and emotionally well.
Before we go on with this session, I just wanted to remind you that you can still upgrade to the Summit's VIP Pass. Besides the lifetime access to all the sessions, you also get the audio files, you get the workbook for each session, you get the expert action blueprint with key takeaways from each masterclass, you get the English subtitles, and really a bunch of other things that will save you tons of time and really make a huge difference with your kid and with your family relationships. So, if you're a busy parent and you want to get the most out of the summit, then I really encourage you to find the button somewhere on this page and go check it out. You can still get access at a discounted price before our summit ends. And now, let's get you back to the program. Sure. And you probably agree with me, like I said, that we live in, one of the safest areas in human history. On paper, at least, our children should feel safer more than ever, right? So, can you explain us what are the modern kind of threats that are pushing kids into constant state of neurological alarm and really turning up what we label now as ADHD?
Well, I mean, first we need to define, I suppose, and maybe you've done it with other speakers, define what ADHD is. I mean, there's a big movement to take the D off of the ADHD because it's not really a disorder as much as it is a stress response, a response of a child's brain to the cortisol and the adversity and the stress. And there's a great amount of stress that children face, although they are more, I mean, secure in some environmental ways. They are also more beleaguered with social media, high pressure in school, bullying and teasing on a completely different level because of technology. Parents who are more financially stressed and more preoccupied with careerism than family. And so, they face, I suppose you could also add to that environmental concerns and political concerns. But I really think that all of that adversity, I suppose you could say it's different adversity than previous generations, but previous generations had wars. They had World War One, they had World War Two, they had, Vietnam, they had. So it's not as if we didn't have, Watergate. It's not as if we didn't have political issues and intrigue and stressors. The real difference for me is how we create the foundation or prepare our children for that stress because we aren't as present as we used to be. Uh, because there are more two parent working families who are not just working, part time, where one parent is primarily there, but both parents are working intensely full time, and children are being put into institutional, what I call day orphanages, institutional care, which is stressing them out before they can handle that stress. So the brain has to be primed sort of like priming the pump. The brain has to be prepared with something called secure attachment in the first 3 years, where your primary attachment figure is, for the most part, present physically and emotionally to help you manage your emotions from moment to moment throughout the day. That primes the pump. So when you get to about 3 years of age, you can internalize that security and some of that resilience and the ability to handle more incremental amounts of stress. But what we're really doing is we're stressing our kids' brains out well before they're prepared. I mean, to the extent that, I mean, I think, you know, infants are being put into these day orphanages, daycare, as early as 6 weeks of age. And so, to look at a neonate who's so incredibly fragile and put them into institutional care, knowing that it's going to stress them out, knowing that the only thing that keeps them feeling safe and secure and keeps the cortisol levels down for the first year is that they're actually very close to their mothers or primary attachment figures' bodies. We have a complete misunderstanding of how you prepare a child for the stress that they're going to face. So then children will go into fight or flight, fight being aggression or behavioral problems, which we're seeing in great amounts in schools and at home. And younger children with aggression, early signs of aggression and behavioral problems. But even from the perspective of this podcast, the flight part of fight or flight, which is distractibility. Distractibility is really nothing more than the brain on stress, and it's the evolutionary flight part of the fight or flight response. It's how the brain responds to great amounts of stress before that brain can handle that stress.
So you mentioned daycare and both parents being away for work. How do parents, maybe often without realizing it, either inflame that sensitivity or protect it?
Well, I mean, I think that many parents just don't understand because society has woven a narrative that children are born resilient, and you can do just about anything with them and they'll be just fine. That resilience is somehow innate, and it's not. Children, there are theories that say that children should not be born for another 9 months after their birth, that they should be still in utero. And some call it the fourth trimester, the first year, because they really are more like marsupials in a way. They need to be physically and emotionally close to their mothers or primary attachment figures' bodies because their bodies regulate things like, not just things like heart rate and respiration, but emotional regulation, right? So every time a mother soothes a baby in distress, from moment to moment, she is basically regulating that child's emotions. And so, the idea is that I think if more parents knew this, not every parent would be able to rise to the occasion, but many would. I mean, I really think that we have not told parents the truth about the neurological fragility and vulnerability of infants and toddlers, that no matter how stressed you are about paying your mortgage payment or your car payment or wanting to have a better life materially, none of that compares to the fact that the first 3 years basically can determine the resilience and personality of your child going forward for the rest of their lives. And if we let parents know that, they would make all kinds of accommodations to have at least one parent physically and emotionally present for their child in those early years. But I think we fed parents a load of baloney about what about the the gaslighting, the myth that neonates and toddlers are resilient, and that's what's really led to this blossoming. So, and then you add to that all the stressors that are their generation's stressors. The last three generations have had different stressors than my parents and my grandparents, who lived through wars and the threat of nuclear war, and yet they were able to manage it. Another thing I suppose is, like Jonathan Haidt said, the constant social media news cycle is a stressor. It's a stressor. It is not making kids break down. If the kids have had a good foundation emotionally and they've had parents who have been more interested in them than their work and than any other activities in their lives, those children are able to ride out the storm of social media and even turn away from it. So the kids that are the most susceptible are the sensitive children who have been treated in a way as if they're older and more emotionally mature than they are at too early an age before their brains can handle that level of stress.
Mm. Speaking of those children, the sensitive children, there's this
Yes.
idea of a sensitivity gene, right? That some children are born more, vulnerable to
Yep.
stress. Um, can you share with us what does a sensitive child actually look like in real life, so we can have an example of that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no evidence of any genetic precursor for anxiety or depression, but there is a precursor, a genetic precursor for sensitivity to stress, which can lead to mental illness if it's not treated sensitively. So the research shows that if a sensitive child, a neurologically, emotionally sensitive child who's sensitive to stress, that may be sensitive to sounds, to touch, to separation. There are children who cry more easily, who are harder to soothe. Often parents will say, "Oh, my baby has colic," and I'm like, "Well, every baby is born with digestive immaturity." So, the idea is that when a child is chronically in distress or hard to soothe, it's a neurological. It's There's an analyst named Esther Bick who talks about emotional skin. There are some children who are born like almost raw without emotional skin, and so parents form that emotional skin around them for the first 3 years that then is like a skin graft, and that skin graft then can only take if that parent has been there to buffer them from stress and provide them with a processing of the experiences and a soothing in distress. Then those sensitive children actually can grow up to become more resilient. They'll always be sensitive, but they can become more resilient to stress as a result of their parents forming the graft of skin over them. But I think we're treating these sensitive children again insensitively, and handing them over to night nurses and giving them to daycare at 6 weeks, and just really, it's almost as if empathy has gone out of parenting. Not all parenting. There's a lot of mothers and fathers who are very sensitive, but there are half of the parents that I treat really have lost the connections, maybe never formed the connections of empathy, because again, empathy is also not innate; it's taught. And so, through parent sensitivity and empathy, that's how you teach your children empathy. So, these young parents I'm seeing can't even see their children's vulnerability. They can't even see the children's neurological and emotional fragility. They project or transpose onto these children that they're stronger and more resilient and more independent. And that's just a false narrative. That is internal neuroses being projected onto children who are incredibly fragile and and vulnerable.
I agree. I agree. And also our parents, our own trauma, right? Our own results trauma. Can you explain maybe how, because we already stopped, studies often suggest that ADHD is heritable, but of course you said that there is no ADHD gene per se. There's this stress sensitivity that you're talking about. Can you explain maybe how parents' own unresolved trauma can be passed down and show up as symptoms in their children without a gene, ever being involved?
Well, it's called generational expression. So, generational expression means that if you haven't had your early losses or traumas treated professionally, you tend to do something called neurotic repetition. You pass them down to your own children. You behave in the same way as your parents, which may have been very insensitive, even cruel, and emotionally abusive. So we pass that down to our children if we're not self-aware, if we haven't gotten help with those early losses, to the extent that many of those parents can't even be in contact with. There's so much deep repression that they're not even in contact with their pain. And then they again transpose that pain onto their own children in the same way they were pained.
When you were talking earlier, about generations where we prioritize themselves, there was even me movement in the 60s, right? That the idea that adults should come first and then children.
Right.
So if we've been told for a generation that, to prioritize ourselves, how do we, like modern parents, how do we now begin to unlearn that and embrace, I don't know, the sacrifice of that you say it's essential?
I mean, I think there was an evolutionary um, desire to nurture children and to put them first. I don't think it was something that was taught to previous generations. I think it was just part of being mammals. We had an evolutionary response to parenting, which is to help our young to survive. We prioritize them over ourselves. I think what's happened is that what we've learned is that evolutionary responses can be unlearned, which is very dangerous if our species is going to survive. I mean, half of the young people I see today, and the statistics prove it out, don't even want children. And the ones who do want to have children don't want to raise their own children. So, the levels of self centeredness, the levels of meanness, are impacting children greatly. I mean, it isn't to say that parents don't have a life, they don't have a relationship, they don't have interests of their own, and it doesn't even mean that they don't have work outside the home. But the idea is that when you're raising young children, those children need you to find them to be the most interesting part of your life. And if your work is more interesting than them, and that is proven out by the number of hours you spend at that work, then children feel that they are not the most interesting part of your life. The only way that children can develop a sense of self esteem or a healthy and positive sense of themselves is when their mothers or primary attachment figures or both parents see them as the most interesting part of their life. But work has become so preoccupying, and careers and success in careers and monetary success due to careers and fame and celebrity, it's all gotten so overly inflated that it's like crack cocaine. And so what it does is it lures parents away from the relational aspects of life, your marriage, your children, your extended family. And so, it's a little like addiction. It feels a little like a very unhealthy addiction to be lured away from the relational aspects of life. I will say that at the end of your life, you're not going to be dying, leaving this earth, whispering under your breath how many more hours you wished you had worked, or more money you had made, or more cars you had had, or uh, more fame and success in your career. You're going to be whispering under your breath, how much you love the people that are holding your hand while you're leaving this earth. And if those people don't love you because you haven't given them enough, if they are not interested enough in you as you're old because you weren't interested enough in them when they were young, then you are going to leave this earth a very unhappy person.
Mm, mm, I agree on that. I agree on that. You also talk about little T traumas, like, not the abuse, not the violence, but kind of subtler wounds, maybe like a mother being physically there, but emotionally absent.
Yeah,
And you're saying that those tiny fractures in early life can explode into something like ADHD later,
yeah.
right? Um, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around that, especially for the parents listening. So, could you maybe explain that, like to a parent who really loved their child and did their best, that love per se, wasn't enough, that their own dissociation or distraction may have damaged their child in a ways that we cannot see really?
I mean, I think you said it well. I don't know if I can say it better than that, but in fact, yes. I mean, parents, that the idea that parents always have the capacity, maybe in earlier generations, the mothers were there physically or the primary attachment figure, but were checked out emotionally, an emotionally sort of disabled mother, whether she's depressed or distracted or resentful to be home or, hates, I mean, those mothers will be physically there, but they will be checked out emotionally. And for a child, that is a trauma. I mean, I always say that you can say you love your children. And I would say most people that come to see me as adults will say, my parents loved me, but they didn't understand me. And my parent, and so the word narcissism comes to mind because I think that's rampant. And that's really the condition of our time, which is self-centeredness and self-focus and narcissism that basically makes it almost impossible to deeply emotionally connect with your children, and even makes you resent having the dependency or having to care for another person because you yourself are so deprived from your own childhood that you didn't get enough, that it's very hard for you then to prioritize another person. We say the joy in life, I think David Brooks is talking about it now too. The joy in life is really the relational part of life, is not in getting, but giving to others. But our generations now, for the last three generations, have been more or less very focused on getting, me, right? Again. And so this causes terrible trauma to children. I mean, the number of parents and young people who come in and say, my mother, my father is narcissistic, meaning they don't really see me. They just see themselves. They don't really understand me or connect with me deeply. They're very self-focused and focused on their own career or behaviors or activities or and so, yeah, I mean, we know the big T traumas, physical abuse, sexual abuse, car crashes, rape, murder, seeing someone, these are the big T traumas, and these are very traumatic. But in truth, the longest lasting traumas that are the hardest to treat have to do with the gestalt that a child is raised in, the chronicity of the relationships, the chronicity of the environment. That's what causes, and that is more subtle because a parent may seem to the world as if they're loving and they bring all the right snacks and to the world, and this is crazy making for children when their parents to the world seem like bright shiny pennies, but then they get home with them and these are parents who are incredibly depressed, incredibly self-focused, incredibly emotionally insensitive. And this is in a way the inconsistency of how you appear to the world as a parent but how you are with your child can cause great, I mean, that to me is really that inconsistency is even more traumatic, and we call that a little t trauma because it's not like a car crash or a murder or physical abuse or being sexually, it's in the emotional abuse of it.
Mm, mm. Got it. You said earlier that the majority of people who come to your therapy, they don't come because they weren't loved, but because they were understood, right? That's what you
Right.
said. So, how would you explain this difference to the people listening? And maybe, how does that gap between being loved and being truly seen fuels a child's dysregulation?
Well, we say in my field that the moment a child is reflected emotionally, the moment their emotions, their feelings are seen and acknowledged by a parent, that is the beginning of the seeds of the development of that child's healthy sense of self. When parents can actually see and validate and acknowledge their child's feelings, whatever those feelings are, anger, sadness, distress, fear, happiness, excitement, it's that acknowledgement of a child's feelings with your eye contact and your face and the tone of your voice and your body language that is the seed of the development of that child's healthy sense of self. And so when parents either can't acknowledge their child's feelings, don't know how to, that is the beginning of a child turning away from relationships and having to develop these what we call pathological defenses to survive. Mm.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Um, but however, there's a fine line, I think, between creating this micro traumas, or how do you little T traumas, how you call them, that kind of break a child's regulation, and then building your child's resistance. How would you? Where's that line? Could you explain that?
Well, explain that question a little bit more. Yes. Yes. Right. Right. So what I would say is there's always stress in life. You don't have to create stress because it exists innately. And I would say, it is a stressful time for children. I think there's much more pressure on children to grow up fast, to potty train sooner, to go to school sooner. It's not school, folks, it's not school under the age of 3. That's daycare. Anything under the age of 3 is daycare. And between 3 and 5, it's preschool. And even that should be very gentle and very few hours and very incremental in the separation and the drop off to move them up to when they're 5 and they can really go to school for 5 hours a day. So, this concept of, yeah, I would say the culture itself is so insensitive that there's plenty of stress. I mean, you don't need to create stress. You can intensify stress. You can sleep train your child, which is incredibly stressful and causes them to go into almost shock. Um, you can leave your child for long periods of time, imagining that they're just fine because they're infants and they're not doing anything important. And I've had people come up to me at cocktail parties and say, I'm going to wait to be with my child till they can talk and interact with me. I'm like, no, 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 no. I'm like, you don't know what's happening. Let me give you a child development course about the first 3 years. And so, yeah, this is the problem. I think it's part of it's really lack of education. So what you're doing is wonderful because you're educating parents in a way that reaches them digitally so they can, tune in. You're reaching parents to help them to really understand and be educated, because if you don't, we say ignorance is the enemy of emotional health. Yeah.
Exactly. Totally agree. You've also spoken about this maternal feminism.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean? And maybe how has this current ideology, in your eyes, ended up hurting both women and men, and of course, in extension, our children?
Well, maternal feminism is a term that came out of the first wave of feminism. The first wave of feminism was very pro child and pro motherhood. It didn't say that you should drop your children to go, be your best me in the world. It said that children and family are the most important part of life, but women need to be respected and need to have choices, and need to, be empowered to make choices. And so, second wave feminism was the problem, because it misinterpreted first wave feminism. It tried to rewrite some script, to say that the only way that women are going to be empowered is to compete with men, to be better than men. And rather than saying, we want you to be the most respected, most admired women and use your power as women, the relational powers, the powers of sensitivity and empathy and nurturing, to make this world a better place, even professionally. I say, that my books are never about women not having careers or working, but to have the choice to raise their children in the most vulnerable years, and also to be able to regulate their careers in a way so they can have very intense careers before they have children, to develop themselves and maybe take pauses or titrate their careers down when they have little children, and then when they're in perimenopause and menopause, like ratchet it up, go crazy, because your testosterone is so high as a woman, and menopause, like, go crazy, so I think just the idea of seasons of life. I don't think we educate young women about seasons of life. Life for women, it's more than men. There are seasons in life. There's a season to be, narcissistically driven towards, in a positive way. There is healthy narcissism. To be driven towards developing ourselves and our careers. And then when we get married and have children, to really lay down our armor and be able to, grasp the incredible parts about being a woman, the parts that are not masculine but are feminine. And then, later in life, to be able to pick up the armor again and go out into the world and take on the world if that's what we want, or but the concept of seasons of life, I think we don't teach women that. We say you're good. And that was second wave feminism's fault. They didn't talk about the seasons of life. They talked about that women should compete with men for a linear life with no seasons. And I think that was really devastating to children and to mothers. Mm.
I agree. I love that idea, by the way. We should emphasize the seasons of life. For
Yeah.
the end, Eric, I have a couple of rapid fire questions if you're up for it. Um, if most people, weren't understood as young, how many parents are raising children they love but they don't know?
I can't say how many children are being raised insensitively, but I will tell you that I think that I guess I can give you a statistic, which is in America, 60% of women would rather stay home with their children in the early years. Many don't have a choice. And so I think the concept is that leaves 40% who would rather not be with their children. And that I can tell you right now, these are women with children, and 40% would rather be at work than be home with their children. And so that gives you some perspective.
Definitely. Thank you. If you had to name one defense mechanism that parents cling to when facing their child's ADHD, what do you think it would be?
That it's somehow organic in a child, that the child has the problem, not the parents, and that they should take them to someone who would fix the child. Fix my child. There's something, my child is broken, like opening a toy out of a package and saying, oh, this toy is broken. No, it's the family that's broken. There's something in that family that's caused that attentional issue, whether it's marital problems or uh, little t trauma and emotional neglect or abuse or yeah, so there's something going on in that family that is maybe a secret to the rest of the world, but that child is the barometer of how the family is doing.
Right, right. If a mother is physically there but mentally absent, is that still less damaging than her being completely gone?
It's a good question. Children derive some physical comfort from their mothers. If mothers can be at least physically comforting, it's certainly better than if they're both physically and emotionally not there. The question is it better to have a caregiver who is both physically and emotionally available to that child? And the answer is it's always better to have a primary attachment figure who's physically and emotionally present for that child, even if that child has to mourn the loss of their mother. But here's the thing, that child is always going to know that that mother was not available. And that's going to be a hole in that child's heart. And so before you come to that conclusion as a woman that you're just not good at mothering and you're better out in the work world and somebody else should raise your child, I'm going to say get help first. Get help first. See how far you can go before you determine you can't go anywhere, because that child will always have a hole in their heart where there should have been you, even if they're raised by a physically and emotionally sensitive babysitter or grandmother. That child will always feel as if you turned away from them, and you have to live with that.
Great. For the parent who's listening and chooses to do this hard, uncomfortable work, what's the single most powerful shift they can make today that will, ripple forward into their children's future?
Reevaluate the time you spend with your child, how much time you spend with your child, how important your child is in your life. And that can only be determined by how much time you spend with them. So if you spend an hour and a half a day with your child, but the rest of the day away from your child, then that is a determinant of how important your child is in your life. John Bowlby said the primary attachment figure is the person that is primarily present throughout the day to soothe that baby when they're in distress from moment to moment. So, who is that person? Who is the primary attachment figure? And we hope that it's you.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And finally, there are dozens of online parenting events out there. In your view, what would you say what set this summit apart from the rest?
I mean, I think the open mindedness that you're willing to talk about ADHD is not some biological problem with a child that should be fixed with medication, because we know that medication just silences children's pain. It is necessary in some situations, but it's often used just to silence the pain and to contribute to this narrative, this false narrative that the child has some biological problem that needs to be fixed with medication. And that is just a false narrative.
Yeah, unfortunately. Thank you, Erica, for your courageous insights into that and how the modern parenting and our cultural priorities, can shape our children's nervous system. I really appreciate your time. Thank you and take care.
Thank you for having me.
Are you loving the advice and insights you're getting? Well, you can get lifetime access to all the summit session when you upgrade your ticket to the VIP pass. This means you're not only getting unlimited access to the sessions, you will also unlock the audio version of the entire summit, expert action blueprint with key takeaways and action steps, English subtitles, and a brilliant workbook that will help you implement everything that you get. You see, the VIP Pass is purposely designed to help you digest all of the content from the summit and implement this advice in your own life. And as you know, the internet is flooded with advice about ADHD. But how much of it actually comes from credible sources? How many times have you been led astray by unknown or unverified advice? Well, unlimited access to the entire summit is a place where information is not only just abundant, it's also trustworthy. So, if you want to be confident in the ADHD strategies every step of the way, then I think this is a place to start. I'm totally positive that you're gonna love the VIP Pass and all of the valuable resources that we have created for you. It's like having a personal library of expert knowledge right in your pocket. And here's the best part. If for any reason at all you don't love it, we'll refund you in full. No questions asked. So you really have nothing to lose. Grab your VIP Pass now and don't miss this opportunity.